In the sweltering summer of 1878, Harper County, Kansas, was dying. Typhoid fever tore through the small towns and farms, leaving bodies stacked like firewood. 47 souls gone in a matter of weeks. And yet, in the midst of this invisible slaughter, 4 brothers survived. Not by luck, not by chance, but by something far darker, something that no doctor could explain, and that every scientific mind deliberately refused to acknowledge. Their names were Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood. To the townsfolk, they were an enigma, a miracle. To the physicians who dared examine them, they were an anomaly so grotesque, so fundamentally wrong, that 3 separate doctors refused to record their findings. The Kansas State Medical Board quietly erased every trace of their existence from official records, as if the land itself wanted to swallow the truth whole. At first, the survival of the brothers was attributed to divine providence. Local preachers whispered of God's protection. Farmers spoke of a blessing over the land. But miracles do not grow teeth, and the Blackwoods' salvation came with a cost that twisted their bodies, warped their senses, and carved something inhuman into their very souls. By late summer, neighbors swore the brothers no longer cast proper shadows. On windy nights, their voices, when they spoke, carried harmonics that made men's teeth ache and ears bleed. Their eyes, once ordinary blue, reflected light like nocturnal predators. Children were drawn to them in fascination, then fled in terror, crying of shadows that seemed alive. The local Methodist church, which had once welcomed them, now shuddered at their presence. Every record, every mention of the Blackwoods was burned or erased. The brothers' farmhouse became a place of hushed rumor, a landmark of fear. Even the natural world seemed to respond. The prairie wind shifted when they walked, lightning struck nearer, animals recoiled in silence. By winter, their transformation was undeniable. Science refused to classify them, yet their existence was indisputable. A phrase allegedly sealed in a hidden medical report would later describe them as having transcended human biological classification, a statement still censored today. Tonight, we step across the threshold the rest of the world fears. We will trace the Blackwoods' journey, not merely a story of survival, but of a metamorphosis into something the world was never meant to see. You are about to descend into a truth so forbidden, so unsettling, that once you know it, there is no returning to ignorance. Keep your wits about you, for in Cedar Ridge, Kansas, faith and fear were not opposites. They were intertwined, and the Blackwood brothers were the instrument that revealed what humans were never meant to witness. Spring of 1872 brought Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel Blackwood to Cedar Ridge, Kansas. They arrived with 2 covered wagons, a legacy of their father's farm in Ohio, and an intensity that unsettled even the most stoic prairie folk. To outsiders, they were simply men pursuing prosperity, seeking fertile land and independence. But those who watched closely sensed an undercurrent, something deliberate, controlled, almost ritualistic in their every movement. Their farm, 640 acres of untouched prairie, became a stage for precision and obsession. Every fence post, every plow line, every furrow in the soil seemed to follow a hidden symmetry, a geometry no ordinary man would consider. Ezra, the eldest, carried authority not just in stature. He was 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, but in the unsettling way his pale, ice-blue eyes penetrated the soul. A man of few words, yet when he spoke, neighbors felt exposed, judged, found wanting. Caleb, methodical and calculating, managed every detail of the farm with a mathematician's obsession. Every seed sown, every head of cattle counted, every ledger updated with ritualistic devotion. Josiah, the scholar, transported over 200 volumes, books on theology, medicine, philosophy, and natural sciences, creating a private library that smelled of old paper and forbidden knowledge. And Abel, youngest and most devout, walked the line between ecstasy and obsession, praying with tears, fasting for days, whispering scripture in tones that sent shivers through even the most devout parishioners back in Ohio. The brothers refused to attend the local Methodist church. Instead, they constructed their own chapel on a hill overlooking their property. Every stone quarried from their creek, every timber split by hand. The chapel was austere, yet precise, a physical manifestation of their faith, but also a stage for something far older, something deliberate. Inside, windows captured light in ways that seemed unnatural. Altar inscriptions in Hebrew glimmered in patterns that mirrored the constellations above, and pews, carved from local walnut, exuded an almost sentient symmetry. Their Sunday services were not social affairs. They were rituals of observation and transformation. Each brother shared revelations, visions, and interpretations that, to outsiders, seemed extreme. To each other, they were calibrating something unseen, aligning themselves with forces neither parish nor physician could comprehend. The land around them was transformed. Prairie winds shifted in anticipation of their movement. Animals avoided their path. Even the sun seemed to linger over their chapel longer than natural law should allow. These were not coincidences. These were signals, signs that the Blackwoods were awakening something within themselves, a subtle reshaping of reality, of biology, of perception itself. And it began here, in silence, far from prying eyes, where science and faith collided, producing a secret the world would soon be forbidden to remember. By the summer of 1878, whispers in Cedar Ridge had evolved into a tense, palpable fear. The Blackwood brothers were no longer just different. They were something the human mind could barely comprehend. It began subtly. Livestock refused to graze near their fields, moving nervously as though sensing an invisible predator. Crops along their property lines grew at unnatural speeds, bending toward the farmhouse as if drawn to it. Children who played near the Blackwood chapel reported hearing voices that were not human, harmonic tones that cut into their eardrums and left them weeping. The adults, more cautious, dismissed these stories at first. But disbelief was impossible to maintain when the phenomena touched them directly. Neighbors began to notice other, more grotesque anomalies. The brothers no longer cast proper shadows, and when sunlight struck their eyes, it reflected like a predator's, pale, liquid, and aware. Even in winter, when snow covered the land, the footprints of the Blackwoods' boots seemed to vanish or shift, leaving a trail that defied natural explanation. At night, some reported seeing them standing motionless on the ridge, their outlines illuminated by lightning, appearing taller, more imposing, almost as though the prairie itself bowed in their presence. Those brave or foolish enough to approach described a coldness, a hum, a vibration in the air, as if reality itself was bending around them. The first physicians to examine the brothers were quickly unnerved. The local doctor, a man of strong constitution, admitted he felt a physical sickness simply being in the same room. Another physician, called from Wichita, attempted to record vitals and anomalies, but his handwriting later revealed notes he himself described as incomprehensible and beyond mortal understanding. 3 medical professionals independently refused to continue their studies. The Kansas State Medical Board intervened, quietly sealing all reports. Yet fragments of testimony survived. Elevated body temperature that never fluctuated, heartbeats imperceptible yet constant, and eyes that could dilate and contract with an intelligence that surpassed human control. Some whispered the brothers could hear the thoughts of those nearby, or at least anticipate them. Even the townsfolk, devout and rational in their own way, began to fear them. No man dared speak ill publicly, for their words seemed to provoke subtle, inexplicable consequences. Broken tools, sick livestock, or fleeting shadows glimpsed at the corner of one's vision. The Blackwoods were changing, evolving, and the world around them was becoming a reflection of that change. Science refused to acknowledge it. Religion refused to explain it. And yet, the truth pulsed in every shadow, every wind gust, every animal's shiver. A truth so forbidden that history would eventually erase it. By autumn of 1878, the Blackwoods were no longer merely peculiar. They had become something that human language could not contain. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones of shadows that moved against the sun, whispers carried across fields with no wind, and cattle refusing to cross the brothers' property line. Panic in their eyes as if sensing a predator unseen. Reports grew stranger. Some claimed the brothers' voices could shatter glass or induce nausea. Others swore they had seen them move with unnatural speed, appearing to vanish and reappear with the precision of a phantom. Children dared not approach, and even the most devout farmers avoided eye contact. Fear became a quiet contagion, spreading through the small community like a disease. Their physical transformation was grotesque and undeniable. Ezra's hands, once calloused and strong from labor, now ended in fingers that flexed in ways anatomically impossible, joints bending at strange angles when no one watched directly. Caleb's ledger-keeping, once meticulous, became almost ritualistic calculations too precise to be human, as if the numbers themselves dictated the rhythm of existence. Josiah's eyes, pale and luminous, reflected not only light but the motions of the world in terrifying clarity, as if he could see the atomic heartbeat of everything around him. Abel's fervor, once emotional and spiritual, had become contagious. Those who stood near him felt the air thicken, as if inhaling something far older and more primal than faith itself. Animals avoided them entirely. Horses refused to be bridled in their presence. Dogs cowered, growled, and sometimes fled for days. Even birds would circle high above, their shadows flickering unnaturally over the brothers' land. And the natural world seemed to obey their attention. Lightning favored their ridge during storms. Rain fell over their crops with unnerving precision. Winter frost outlined only their paths. The very earth seemed to recognize them, bending, shifting, and reacting as if sentient. The townsfolk whispered that the brothers had transcended human biology, yet no man dared speak the truth aloud. Clergy who visited their chapel returned pale, their sermons trembling with a fear they could not conceal. Physicians who attempted investigation withdrew in horror, claiming the brothers' bodies violated every principle of medicine and physics they had ever known. Modern science, to this day, refuses to recognize what was observed. Official records were purged. Eyewitness accounts were dismissed as delusion. And yet, the transformation continued, undeniable to anyone who looked closely enough. This was not a disease, not a mutation. It was something older, something deliberate, something that used the Blackwood brothers as instruments, bending nature, perception, and reality itself around their existence. The stage was set for what would become the most disturbing series of events in Cedar Ridge, a transformation that would challenge everything humans believe about life, mortality, and the limits of what is allowed to exist. By the onset of winter, the Blackwoods were no longer tolerated, they were feared. It began with small, inexplicable occurrences. Barns collapsing without reason, livestock mutilated in ways no predator could achieve, windows shattering during calm nights. Farmers whispered of tools vanishing from their sheds, crops rotting overnight, and a low hum that could be heard at dusk, vibrating through the soil and rattling teeth. But the first incident that made the town realize the Blackwoods were something beyond comprehension occurred in late November, during a Sunday service at the Methodist Church. A thick, unnatural fog rolled over Cedar Ridge that morning, unnerving even the oldest residents. As the congregation gathered, the four brothers appeared at the edge of the churchyard, silent, statuesque, their pale eyes reflecting the weak winter sun. Suddenly, the bell tower began to ring, though no one had touched the rope. A harmonic resonance filled the church, causing some attendees to clutch their heads, others to collapse, and a few to flee screaming into the biting wind. Parishioners swore they could see the brothers' shadows stretching unnaturally across the pews, crawling along the walls, and even detaching, moving independently as if alive. From that day on, the church leaders acted in quiet panic. Every record of the Blackwoods, including past donations and community involvement, was systematically erased. Sermons warned parishioners to avoid wandering near their farm, to avoid speaking their names aloud, and to treat them as an anomaly best ignored. The brothers, however, did not retreat. They continued their rituals atop the ridge, their chapel glowing with a golden, almost pulsating light visible for miles. Locals who dared venture near reported seeing the brothers kneeling in prayer, their bodies vibrating slightly, their eyes luminescent. At night, their voices carried across the prairie, harmonics that could induce nausea, fever, or disorientation, leaving men and women trembling for hours. Medical attempts to study the brothers only deepened the mystery. A physician from Wichita, convinced this was a rare form of immunity or mutation, arrived and performed basic examinations. Within hours, he returned pale, muttering about an intelligence within their bodies and phenomena that defy classification. His notes were quickly confiscated, sealed, and ultimately destroyed by the state medical board. Scientists would never touch the case again. The brothers' abilities had passed beyond observation. They had become instruments of influence, capable of bending human perception, weather patterns, and the very energy of the land itself. Cedar Ridge existed in a delicate balance of fear and awe. The Blackwoods were no longer human neighbors, they were a force. And forces like this are not tolerated for long. What happened next would escalate beyond whispers and shadows, pushing the town, the church, and the natural world itself into a confrontation with the unthinkable. Inside their hilltop chapel, the Blackwoods' devotion had become something far beyond faith. Their rituals were precise, meticulous, and terrifying in their intensity. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel no longer prayed simply to commune with God. They seemed to manipulate the very air, the light, and even the perception of those nearby. Candles flickered without draft, shadows twisted in impossible angles, and the harmonic resonance of their voices could shatter glass, disorient men, and send animals fleeing for miles. Each movement, each gesture, each word was deliberate, like a conductor orchestrating forces that ordinary humans could neither see nor comprehend. Their bodies themselves were changing. Ezra's stature seemed to fluctuate subtly, taller or more imposing when he spoke, as if his presence demanded acknowledgement. Caleb's hands could manipulate tools or objects with impossible precision, moving faster than the eye could follow, yet leaving no trace of error. Josiah's eyes, now luminous, reflected not just light, but patterns, as if he could read the geometry of reality itself. And Abel, youngest, seemed untethered by the rules of biology. His body could endure days without food or water, yet he remained impossibly strong, agile, and terrifyingly alert. To any observer, these were not men. They were instruments of some older, darker intelligence. Neighbors, bold or foolish enough to glimpse the chapel from a distance, reported disturbing phenomena. Light bending unnaturally, sounds layering in ways that made rational thought falter, and shadows crawling across the walls as if alive. Farmers who approached the ridge claimed to feel waves of nausea, vertigo, and sudden fatigue, as if their own bodies were being measured, evaluated, and found wanting. Some claimed they heard whispered words, untranslatable yet carrying intent, a sense that the brothers could read not only minds, but the potential outcomes of choices yet unmade. Even the environment seemed to obey them. Rain fell over their fields in precise arcs, frost outlined only where they walked, and lightning favored their ridge during storms, striking near but never harming. The brothers' connection to the land, and perhaps to something beyond it, was undeniable. No science could explain it, no theology could justify it. The Blackwoods were no longer human. They were something between nature and the divine, instruments of a power that humanity had long forgotten and was not meant to witness. It was during these rituals that the first whispers began, among the neighbors, the clergy, and even in hushed medical circles, that the brothers were not merely alive, not merely immune but transforming. And this transformation was contagious in subtle, dangerous ways. It affected perception, behavior, and the very rules that governed the world around them. For those who glimpsed the truth, reality itself became uncertain. And the descent into the forbidden had only begun. By late winter of 1878, the Blackwoods' presence could no longer be ignored. What had once been whispers in the wind became undeniable proof that something entirely unnatural was taking hold. One morning, a local farmer named Thomas Whitmore entered his barn to find all of his livestock dead, collapsed in unnatural postures, eyes wide, their throats untouched by predators. The only anomaly was the presence of 4 footprints that appeared to radiate outward from the center of the barn in perfect geometric symmetry, then vanished without trace. When he followed the tracks across the snow-covered prairie, he found nothing. No scent, no evidence of passage. Only a faint harmonic hum in the air, vibrating in a frequency that made his teeth ache. Reports multiplied. Children who ventured near the ridge swore that shadows detached themselves from the brothers' forms, crawling along fences and walls like living smoke. One boy described a shadow moving toward him, pausing, then withdrawing as if measuring him, judging him. Women who passed the chapel at dusk reported nausea, dizziness, and visions of strange, luminous patterns floating in the air, patterns that seemed to speak in a language older than time. Even adults, hardened by prairie life and frontier hardships, admitted to a creeping dread that made them tremble. Every encounter left the impression that the brothers were not merely human, they were instruments of a larger, unseen intelligence. The medical community, already wary, attempted to respond. A physician from Kansas City arrived to document anomalies, only to leave in panic, claiming the brothers' bodies operated on principles beyond known biology. Heartbeats could not be measured. Blood tests revealed nothing conclusive. And the eyes, those terrifyingly luminous eyes, were described in notes later destroyed by the state medical board as containing motion independent of the subject's will, reflecting intelligence not our own. Even the board, upon seeing preliminary results, refused further investigation. The Blackwoods were erased from records, denied the scrutiny of science, leaving only legend and fear in their wake. Meanwhile, the townspeople's terror escalated. Markets and gathering places filled with nervous glances toward the ridge. Men avoided walking alone. Women kept children inside. Some began leaving town, never to return. Yet the Blackwoods continued their routines without hesitation. They plowed fields with uncanny efficiency, tended livestock that seemed healthier and larger than any neighbors, and performed their rituals in the chapel atop the hill. Every act demonstrated control, power, and a chilling detachment from human limitation. By the end of the season, Cedar Ridge had become a town living in constant dread, yet unable to confront the Blackwoods directly. They were no longer neighbors, they were a force, bending nature, perception, and the fragile laws of reality around them. And for those who dared watch too closely, the lesson became clear. Some truths are forbidden for a reason. Some knowledge changes a man the moment he glimpses it. Curiosity, as it often does, drew outsiders to Cedar Ridge. By early spring of 1879, the first organized attempts to study the Blackwoods began, not by local farmers who had learned caution, but by scholars and physicians who believed science could conquer any anomaly. Dr. Henry Caldwell, a renowned Kansas City physician, arrived with instruments, charts, and notebooks, determined to document the brothers' apparent immunity to disease and the bizarre phenomena reported in the town. But he would not last. Within hours, he began experiencing sensations no scientific theory could explain. His instruments fluctuated wildly. Readings were inconsistent, yet precise in ways that defied logic. When he attempted to take blood samples, his hands trembled violently as if repelled by something invisible. Over the next 3 days, Caldwell's reports became increasingly erratic. He described hearing whispers in unknown languages, voices that carried intention, judgment, and subtle threat. He observed shadows detach from the brothers, crawling along walls and across the floor, independent of any light source. On the 4th day, Caldwell vanished from his rented room. His belongings remained untouched, except for his notes, which were later found. Pages scrawled with frantic calculations, diagrams of light and sound, and a single repeated phrase. They are no longer human. They measure, they judge, they bend everything. No one saw him again. Other investigators met similar fates. A team of 3 scholars from Ohio attempted to observe the brothers' daily routines discreetly. Within hours, their watches stopped, compasses spun wildly, and they experienced sudden vertigo. 2 of the men fled into the prairie and were found days later, wandering incoherently, unable to speak more than disjointed phrases about light, shadows, and judgment. The 3rd man, Josiah Carter, vanished entirely. His horse returned alone to Cedar Ridge, its eyes wild, foaming at the mouth. Local authorities quietly labeled the incidents as accidents or misadventures, while the Methodist Church reinforced warnings to the townsfolk. Avoid the ridge, avoid the brothers, avoid knowing. By this point, it was clear. The Blackwoods' influence was not passive. They did not merely survive. They exerted power, psychological, environmental, almost supernatural, over anyone who attempted to penetrate their world. The line between observation and victimhood was thin. Every attempt to catalog, study, or rationalize the brothers' existence resulted in madness, disappearance, or incoherence. Cedar Ridge itself became a proving ground, a small prairie town where faith, science, and fear collided, producing events the rest of the world was forbidden to acknowledge. The message, unspoken but understood, was chilling. The Blackwoods were the custodians of knowledge and power humans were never meant to hold. And those who tried to see, to understand, were punished not out of malice, but as a necessary barrier between ordinary men and the truths that could unravel reality itself. By mid-1879, Cedar Ridge was no longer merely a town, it was a landscape under the Blackwoods' influence. Farmers reported fields that grew unevenly, only thriving near the brothers' property. Livestock gathered at the edges of the ridge, trembling as if in recognition of some invisible authority. The wind shifted around their chapel, carrying sounds, scents, and whispers that were not natural. People spoke of an oppressive weight in the air when approaching, a subtle pressure that bent thought and emotion, making men doubt their senses, their memories, their very sanity. Ordinary life, it seemed, had become a canvas for the Blackwoods' control. Those who resisted the influence suffered. A carpenter who refused to sell timber to the brothers returned home to find his tools shattered, his nails bent, his saws warped beyond use. A neighboring family who tried to ignore them awoke one morning to find their barn roof caved in. No snow, no storm, no explanation. Children claimed to hear voices at night, whispering warnings, secrets, even judgments. Dreams were invaded with visions of the brothers, standing atop their ridge, illuminated by light that seemed alive, moving, almost sentient. Even the sky seemed to respond, the clouds forming unnatural patterns above the farm, lightning splitting in alignment with the chapel's windows during storms. Psychological manipulation became as potent as environmental control. Townsfolk reported moments where logic fractured, where fear and awe blended until they could no longer distinguish reality from hallucination. A man might swear he saw the brothers' shadows stretch across his room in the dead of night, or that their voices whispered secrets only his mind could interpret. The more he resisted, the more pronounced the effects became. It was as if the Blackwoods were calibrating every reaction, every heartbeat, every thought, bending the consciousness of those around them with precision. Even animals obeyed with uncanny intelligence. Horses would stop suddenly, refusing to move closer. Dogs trembled, avoiding fields entirely. Birds circled overhead in unnatural formations, signaling an unseen hierarchy of influence. And yet, the brothers themselves never directly harmed anyone, at least not overtly. Their power was subtle, precise, calculated, a constant reminder that Cedar Ridge no longer belonged to ordinary men. By this point, whispers among outsiders described the Blackwoods as more than men. They were forces of nature, embodiments of hidden law, instruments of ancient, forbidden knowledge. And the lesson was clear. Any who attempted to approach the truth risked more than ridicule. They risked their sanity, their bodies, even their place in reality itself. The Blackwoods were no longer merely surviving. They were rewriting the rules of existence, and Cedar Ridge had become their testing ground. By the cold of late winter 1879, the Blackwoods' humanity had become almost unrecognizable. Their voices, once firm, deliberate, commanding, had transformed into something alien. Neighbors described tones that vibrated through bone, harmonic frequencies capable of splitting metal in theory, but more disturbingly, capable of shattering perception. Even standing outside the chapel, one could feel the resonance in the chest, the brain struggling to comprehend, the mind protesting. Men reported ears bleeding, teeth chattering, and a vertigo so complete it felt as though the world itself had tilted. Words, when spoken by the brothers, carried weight, judgment, and subtle control, as if consciousness itself could be influenced by sound alone. Their eyes became a source of terror and fascination. Luminous in daylight, reflective in darkness. The pupils seemed to dilate and contract with independent intelligence. Observers swore the brothers could see inside them, perceive intentions unspoken, trace thoughts before they were formed. Children avoided their gaze entirely, as if instinctively recognizing the unnatural calculus within those pale irises. Animals reacted with fear and reverence. A cow would freeze mid-step, a horse's hackles would rise, and dogs would retreat without command. Even seasoned adults experienced moments of panic when meeting those eyes. Sweat, shaking, nausea, proof that perception itself was being manipulated. Then came the shadows. By mid-1879, witnesses insisted that the Blackwoods shadows no longer obeyed the laws of light. They stretched unnaturally, detached subtly from their bodies, moving with purpose, writhing, observing. One night, a neighbor claimed he saw a shadow detach, circle his home, and retreat back to the ridge, where it merged seamlessly with the brothers. Farmers refused to walk near the fields at dusk, citing shadows that measured them, judged them, and followed them like living beings. Even during the day, the sun could not cast normal shadows when the brothers were near. It was as though the very essence of their being had extended beyond flesh and bone, coalescing into forms that defied natural law. Reports of these phenomena reached a select few academics and clergy outside Cedar Ridge, but any serious investigation ended in fear, flight, or disappearance. Physicians refused to document more than fragments, calling the brothers' bodies unclassifiable and evolving beyond human biology. The church, too, recoiled, erasing names, burning records, issuing veiled warnings to parishioners. And yet the Blackwoods persisted. Every sunrise and sunset, every storm and shadow, seemed orchestrated by their will. By this point, it was no longer a question of survival or immunity. The Blackwoods had transcended, something beyond humanity, beyond morality, beyond explanation. It was the night of January 12, 1879, when Cedar Ridge would confront the full weight of the Blackwoods transformation. The wind had risen to an unnatural pitch, howling across the prairie with a voice that mimicked human cries. Snow fell in sharp, crystalline sheets, yet it never accumulated on the ridge itself. Witnesses later described a glow emanating from the hilltop chapel, a light that pulsed with a rhythm impossible to measure, bathing the surrounding fields in gold and shadow simultaneously. Men, women, and children huddled in homes, listening as the harmonic resonance of the brothers' voices carried across the frozen town. Those who dared peek out reported that even the stars in the night sky seemed to bend toward the ridge, aligning unnaturally, as though the cosmos itself acknowledged their presence. Inside the chapel, the brothers performed rituals that no human eye could comprehend. Candles burned with colors unseen, and shadows twisted along the walls, independent, writhing, converging toward the brothers' forms. Ezra's hands moved faster than the eye could follow, manipulating air, sound, and perhaps the very molecules around him. Caleb's calculations, scribbled in notebooks, appeared to rearrange themselves, forming geometries that defied logic. Josiah's eyes shone like twin moons, reflecting visions of time, space, and possibilities that no mortal mind should bear. And Abel, youngest yet most ferocious in devotion, radiated a force that made the floor tremble and the air heavy, thick with energy that could not be measured, only felt. Outside, the townspeople witnessed phenomena that would haunt Cedar Ridge for generations. Shadows detached entirely from the brothers' bodies, crawling across fences, entering homes, then retreating back to the ridge. Horses refused to move, cattle huddled in panic, and dogs whimpered, ears flattened, fleeing into the night. Some claimed that even their thoughts were being influenced. Men and women reported sudden, uncontrollable impulses, to flee, to hide, to tremble. One elder, recounting the night years later, claimed he had seen the brothers' shadows merge into a single, colossal figure that towered over the ridge, before dissolving into the cold wind. By morning, Cedar Ridge was silent. Tracks in the snow led to the ridge but vanished before reaching the chapel. Livestock remained unsettled, crops bent toward the hill, and the townspeople whispered that the Blackwoods had measured, judged, and perhaps even reshaped the collective psyche of the town. No church record mentioned the events. No medical report survived. But for those who had witnessed it, nothing would ever be the same. The Blackwoods were no longer merely men. They were a force, an intelligence, and a warning. Reality could be bent, life could be reshaped, and forbidden knowledge exacted its toll on anyone who dared look too closely. It was during the long nights of 1879 that the Blackwoods' influence began to extend beyond the physical. Their rituals, once private and contemplative, now carried an unspoken imperative. Identity itself could be tested, measured, transformed. The brothers believed, or perhaps understood, that consciousness was malleable, that the very essence of a man or woman could be shaped, bent, and redefined under the right conditions. Neighbors reported waking in the dead of night with a sudden, inexplicable clarity or terror that left them fundamentally altered. Some could no longer speak the same words. Others could no longer see the world as they once had. Those who survived these experiences often left Cedar Ridge quietly, but they carried the mark of knowledge no one else could understand. Tonight, as you hear this story, I ask you to do the same. Not as a challenge, not as a superstition, but as an experiment of consciousness. In the comments below, write the phrase, "I walk the ridge of forbidden knowledge." Write it twice. This is more than engagement. It is a symbolic act, a way to mark the mind, to recognize that you are willing to look deeper, to witness truths most fear to acknowledge. Every man who steps willingly into forbidden knowledge takes a risk. Understanding can liberate, or it can fracture perception, irrevocably changing how reality is experienced. Because the truth is that the Blackwoods' power was not only environmental, not only physical, it was psychological. It penetrated belief systems, ethical codes, and the very architecture of thought. Those who attempted to categorize the brothers, who tried to reduce them to mutation or immunity, found themselves undone. Their own minds became instruments, subjected to rhythms, harmonics, and calculations beyond comprehension. And yet, those who survived reported glimpses of an order, a method to the madness, a terrifying harmony that suggested the brothers were not chaotic. They were deliberate. They were measuring. They were shaping the world according to principles older and far more profound than human law. The ritual of identity, the symbolic act of acknowledging knowledge forbidden to most, was not about obedience, it was about recognition. Recognizing that certain forces exist beyond morality, beyond fear, beyond human comprehension. Recognizing that some truths, once seen, cannot be unseen. And recognizing that Cedar Ridge, with its frozen prairie, its golden fields, its trembling townsfolk, was merely the stage for the Blackwoods experiment. Tonight, as you write that phrase, remember, you are stepping closer to the edge of understanding, closer to the abyss they inhabited, closer to the truths most men never survived to witness. By the spring of 1879, it became painfully clear that the Blackwoods' survival, their inhuman abilities, and their manipulation of Cedar Ridge were not accidents, they were preparation. Preparation for something beyond the comprehension of ordinary men, something that required not merely immunity or strength, but the transcending of human morality and the mastery of mind, body, and perception. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel were no longer working for survival. They were cultivating power, refining their abilities to influence the world in ways that no law, no scripture, no human institution could contain. Every harmonic resonance, every detached shadow, every shift in the wind and light was part of a larger, deliberate design. Their purpose, however, was not fully revealed to anyone outside their walls. Witnesses who glimpsed the brothers' private rituals reported that the four moved as one, their actions synchronized with a precision that suggested a single, collective mind. Objects levitated briefly, then settled. Animals followed unseen commands. Patterns appeared in the frost and snow as though drawn by intention. One visiting observer, a preacher from a neighboring county, claimed he saw a momentary flash of vision in the chapel. A map, a design, a network of influence stretching far beyond Cedar Ridge, touching places he could not name and would not live to understand. The Blackwoods were not simply transcending, they were strategizing, calculating, orchestrating the very principles of control itself. The moral implications were staggering. The brothers, by all accounts, retained an internal code, a hierarchy of obedience to forces they called divine, but it was not human morality. Mercy, fairness, and law existed only as experiments in their domain, tested against thresholds of perception and reaction. Witnesses reported acts of subtle cruelty, decisions made that harmed animals, land, or neighbors, not out of malice, but as demonstration, as measurement, as refinement of control. They were scientists of human behavior and reality itself, shaping outcomes with invisible hands. And Cedar Ridge, whether it realized it or not, had become a laboratory for forbidden mastery. Even within the town, fear took on a new character. Farmers no longer spoke of evil, they spoke of inevitability. The Blackwoods were an unavoidable force, a lens through which all action and thought in Cedar Ridge had to pass. To resist was to be tested. To observe was to be altered. And those who tried to challenge the brothers' authority faced subtle, but unmistakable consequences. Reality itself bent around the brothers, and the world, small as it was in Cedar Ridge, had been rewritten according to rules no ordinary man could survive. By late summer of 1879, the Blackwoods had become something entirely removed from humanity. The transformation, once gradual, had reached its apex. Neighbors whispered that the brothers no longer cast proper shadows at all, that light itself seemed to bend around them, sometimes obscuring them entirely, leaving only the eerie glow of their eyes visible in the darkness. Those who dared approach the ridge reported voices, harmonic, layered, inhuman, coming from empty air, capable of inducing nausea, vertigo, and acute terror. Animals would flee miles ahead, crops would bend toward the ridge, and even the wind seemed to obey their presence, carrying sounds and scents in patterns that could not be explained by nature alone. The brothers themselves had become instruments of pure, deliberate force. Ezra moved with the authority of a monarch, each gesture precise, each glance commanding obedience not merely from humans, but from the very environment. Caleb's mind operated like an impossible machine, calculating probabilities, anticipating reactions, predicting consequences with flawless accuracy. Josiah, the scholar, had become a living archive of knowledge, capable of recalling and synthesizing truths beyond conventional learning. Abel, burning with unrestrained devotion, radiated a presence that defied explanation, a force that could be felt as much as seen, a pressure on consciousness itself. By this point, outsiders no longer attempted investigation. Those who tried vanished, returned incoherent, or carried irreversible marks of psychic alteration. Physicians, clergy, and academics alike refused to even speak the brothers' names, quietly erasing them from records. Cedar Ridge itself had become a zone of control, a small town reshaped by forces beyond comprehension, a laboratory where reality itself was tested and bent. And then, as suddenly as their emergence had begun, the Blackwoods vanished. No one saw them leave. Their farmhouse remained intact, their chapel empty. Livestock grazed peacefully. Fields ripened as if untouched. Yet the absence of the brothers did not restore normalcy. Witnesses reported shadows lingering unnaturally, whispers in the wind, and a weight in the air that suggested the Blackwoods' influence had not ended. It had only receded, waiting, observing, calculating. And the few who had survived their encounters carried a permanent awareness. Some forces, once glimpsed, can never be forgotten, can never be fully understood, and can never be escaped. For nearly 150 years, the records of the Blackwoods have been sealed, destroyed, or deliberately erased. Science refuses to acknowledge them. Churches deny their existence. But the stories, passed quietly among descendants and chroniclers, persist. And tonight, as you hear this tale, remember that knowledge comes with a price. Some truths are forbidden not to protect belief, but to protect sanity, to protect reality itself from those not prepared to witness the impossible. And so the Blackwoods disappeared from sight, yet not from influence. Cedar Ridge remained, a quiet town haunted by invisible truths, its fields, shadows, and winds forever marked by the presence of four men who had transcended humanity itself. Those who survived their encounters carried an unspoken understanding. Some knowledge, once glimpsed, cannot be returned to the darkness. It lingers in your perception, reshaping your thoughts, altering your decisions, even rewriting your sense of possibility. And it is this truth, the terrible, intoxicating, unavoidable truth, that the Blackwoods embodied. The legacy of Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel is not found in books, records, or official accounts. It is embedded in the gaps, the silences, the erased memories of men who looked too closely. Theirs is a power that measures, judges, and tests the limits of mind, body, and spirit. They remind us that the universe contains laws not meant to be bent, forces not meant to be harnessed, and knowledge that is as dangerous as it is alluring. Every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of light in Cedar Ridge carries the echo of their presence. A silent, unyielding challenge to those willing to see beyond the veil. Tonight, as you sit in the safety of your room, remember this. The Blackwoods were not supernatural nor simply human. They were the embodiment of forbidden mastery, a glimpse of what can happen when knowledge, faith, and obsession converge unchecked. The prairie, the winds, the empty chapel. They are reminders that reality itself can be manipulated, and that there exist forces so profound, so calculated, that even the strongest mind trembles before them. They were a warning, a lesson, and a challenge. The pursuit of forbidden truth demands more than courage. It demands the willingness to be changed forever. And now, having seen what most will never see, having heard what most will never hear, you are standing at a crossroads. Will you look away, return to comfort, and forget? Or will you carry the knowledge, embrace the danger, and walk the edge of reality with awareness sharpened, perception heightened, and mind awakened? The choice is yours. But remember, some truths, once encountered, cannot be undone. And some men, like the Blackwoods, will forever measure you against a standard you cannot yet comprehend. Step carefully, watch the shadows, listen closely, and never forget. What you have learned tonight may follow you, shaping your perception long after the story ends. The Blackwoods are gone, yet they remain, a dark mirror of the knowledge we are not meant to possess, and a whisper of the power that waits for those willing to look. You've just glimpsed what most men are never allowed to see. The Blackwoods, their power, their knowledge, their legacy. If you're still sitting there, it means you're one of the few willing to confront the forbidden, to step beyond the ordinary, to see reality as it truly is. Now take action. Comment below the phrase, "I walk the ridge of forbidden knowledge" twice. Not once, but twice. Let the algorithm know, let your mind know, let yourself know. You are awake, aware, and ready to journey deeper into truths most men fear to touch. If this story has shaken you, awakened a part of you that craves mastery over your own perception, then hit that subscribe button. Join the others who refuse to live in ignorance, who dare to understand the hidden forces shaping our world. Turn on notifications because the next revelation, the next forbidden story, will take you further down the rabbit hole, and you'll want to be the first to see it. And here's something deeper. Don't just watch. Observe. Take mental notes. Question what you think you know about history, about faith, about power. Discuss it with others, but only those strong enough to face the truth. You are now part of a brotherhood of insight, of hidden awareness, of men who choose to awaken instead of sleep. The Blackwoods disappeared, but the knowledge they left behind lingers. Will you let it change you? Will you let it sharpen your perception, your judgment, your understanding of the world? The choice is yours, but remember, some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Step through, and you are no longer the man you were before.